Welcome to Use the Fours, a Smash-Up podcast. I'm AndIQuote, and today I will be discussing my personal tier list that I've created with the help of some friends over the past several years. Tier lists are fun to discuss, and Smash-Up has not had any tier list discussion on a large scale in a long time, so I'm hoping to change that today. So before we jump into it, there are some guidelines that I'd like to follow. Placements are based on my personal experience, the personal experience of other players, data from multiple tournaments over the last several years, and extensive discussion with high-level players. Primarily myself, my three co-hosts, and friend of the show, Quality Mojo. We've all had input into how this tier list looks today. The factions are ranked sequentially, 1 to 106, best to worst. And as a reminder, this is a tier list for 2-player games only. Several factions become more or less capable in higher player counts, and there's a variety of reasons for that, but some factions that will be fairly high tier on this list drop in higher player counts, and some factions that will be lower tier in 2-player raise up a bit in 3-player, and we'll discuss this as we get to them. The strength margins between factions are very close, often even across different tiers. With the recent rebalances in errata, Smash-Up's competitive balance is in a very healthy place in 2026. And due to the numerous and significant recent changes to multiple factions, many placements are still tentative at this time. The 15 reworked factions, plus the Munchkin faction warriors in particular, have yet to fully establish themselves in the 2026 metagame. As a reminder, these are those factions. As such, this list does not propose to serve as the be-all, end-all guide to faction strength levels. This is, again, my personal experience, my personal opinion, informed by other opinions for sure, but ultimately, I've got this list ordered the way I think it needs to be ordered. You are welcome to disagree. I certainly don't want to give anyone the impression that I'm calling factions in the lower tiers weak. As said, the margins in strength differences are very narrow now, so factions across the board are more equal than ever. And my co-hosts and I will discuss this, but we like a lot of factions that are quote-unquote lower tier. And I don't want this tier list to ever discourage anyone from trying to play the lower tier factions. That's not the point of this. And I'll get into some more guidelines about what makes a faction low tier here in just a moment. But please do not let this dissuade you from experimenting. That's one of the big draws of this game, is getting to try different combinations out and finding new discoveries. To paraphrase something that the Unmatched Player Montage said when he made his own tier list episode a few weeks ago, remember that Smash-Up is much more than a tier list. Player skill in understanding matchups, pairings, and interactions go well beyond just seeing which faction is higher than another. There's so much more to that in this game, especially since every faction is in the game paired with another faction. So, let's talk about C tier. What makes a faction C tier level, in my opinion? So to me, C-tier factions have very low consistency and or thrive specifically with a certain type of partner while often floundering with others. Alternatively, a few factions in this tier work as effective counterpicks to higher-ranked factions while struggling against other opponents. All this to say, C-tier factions tend to be heavily matchup dependent. You have to know when to pick them. So, without further ado, we will jump into the first 7 factions in C tier this episode, and I will be joined shortly by my co-host, Berryl. So, S.H.I.E.L.D. is our first faction we'll be discussing tonight. One of the Marvel factions released several years ago now. What do you think about S.H.I.E.L.D., Berryl?
Well, when Marvel came out, I thought, okay, this is nice. It's a new take on Swarm. It's clearly more restrained than robots, and I think we all appreciated that at the time, because Swarm was always seen as a very strong archetype. Like, robots were obviously always at the top. Horses at the time were considered pretty darn strong, and S.H.I.E.L.D. felt, again, more restrained. But I think over time we kind of realized, they're not just restrained, they're kind of shackled, almost, where they're not very versatile. Like, all their minions are doing one of two things. They're either playing more minions or they're powering up from having more minions. Like, Maria Hill and the S.H.I.E.L.D. agent power up from having more minions, and Nick Fury and Agent Coulson play more minions. That's all of their minions do. That's half their cards. So half the capabilities are extremely narrow-minded, and their actions don't help with that either. So again, over time, we kind of realized that they're just not, they're not doing enough different things to support a higher placement than what is ultimately the bottom of the barrel.
Right. I think S.H.I.E.L.D. was maybe the first time a lot of us realized that, you can do Swarm badly. you can do it in a very restrained, limited way. And that's going to be a theme for another faction we'll discuss later. But yes, I mean, Shield. You mentioned the actions. I mean, Shield is not served at all by their actions. They have their one after scoring recursion special action that they can play, and that's helpful. But so many times I find that they're starved for actions. They need more action plays than they have to be able to do what they need to do successfully. So with that in mind, here in the bottom left column here, you can see that we've got some partners listed. These partner recommendations are not the be-all, end-all. This is the only partners you should choose. But they are, factions that we have tried before, and one or more of us have tried before, and we feel pretty confident in recommending as factions that will help the whatever faction we're talking about carry out their game plan. So, of course, we have Ghosts. Ghost Shield, Ghosts have 3, I suppose. All of their minions except for their boss minion are power 3 or less, which Shield loves. Ghosts have Ghostly Arrival to get minions out faster and let you still play extra actions, which is so huge. And Shield is very good at dumping their hand all at once, which allows Ghosts to do Ghosts things.
Same idea where having a big hand is actually easier to dump than having a medium-sized hand or a small hand.
Right. Ghost. And when we get to Ghosts, we'll have a lot to say about that, I'm sure. But
yeah, that's not for a while, though.
Not for a while, indeed. Then we've got Hydra and Kree, both of which are also Marvel factions alongside S.H.I.E.L.D. in the same box. So very easy to try these combos out if you've only got the Marvel set, for example. Hydra and S.H.I.E.L.D. is a very ironic combination if you have any familiarity with Marvel Comics. But they do work well together because Hydra are also about dumping little minions out into play as fast as possible. They just do it a little more elegantly than S.H.I.E.L.D. does. And Kree gives S.H.I.E.L.D. the extra actions they so desperately need. And Kree like having extra minions to play. So they really complement each other well in that respect. And same with Mulan of the Disney set. Lots of very powerful small minions to play that S.H.I.E.L.D. can really help with. Mulan also has a lot of draw, has a little more offense, and that's something you may have noticed in the strengths column as well, is S.H.I.E.L.D. have a destruction card, which is not always a given for a swarm-style faction. But they have a little bit of... They have some teeth to them that let them deal with obstacles that not all swarm factions can handle.
Yes, and something I want to say here is that the gulf between having 0 removal, minion removal in particular, the gulf between having 0 minion removal and having even just 1 limited removal card, like S.H.I.E.L.D. is only destroy a minion of power 3 or less, that's a huge gulf. Especially in competitive play, you have to play around even the tiniest amount of removal so much differently than you have to play around no removal at all. Like, I'm sure something we'll talk about on this podcast quite a bit is the concept of only needing to commit what you need. Like, if you can get away with just leaving a 2-power minion on a base and getting second place, that 2-power minion's worth 2 VP, maybe even 3 VP on the right base. And so if your opponent has removal, you can't always get away with that because there's always the risk that you'll get kicked off and they'll still score the base without you.
Right.
And so S.H.I.E.L.D. brings, again, like you said, those teeth, even if it's very limited teeth that competes with their very competitive action plays, it gives them some threat to solo, which is, again, a lot better than none.
Yes, 1 is better than none. We would prefer more than 1, but we'll take 1 if we can get it.
Speaking of more than 1, Star Roamers is another one where you mentioned earlier secret mission rescue mission. Their recursion card is after scoring, just like port me up. And after scoring recursion, it's great because it's a free play. You don't have to use your normal place for it, but it suffers from needing to be timed at the perfect moment. Like, in order to get all of your good minions back and use them all again, like Nick Fury, you have to have rescue mission in hand when you do your big burst. And Star Roamers and S.H.I.E.L.D. have a lot of other things going for them, but one of the bigger ones is having more of that after scoring recursion means you're more likely to have some of it in hand when you do your big burst.
Right. Star Roamer S.H.I.E.L.D., that's a bandit combo. Those of you who may remember the first day of Smashing, he used this in the very first match. They have a really neat trick where they can play a base with Weird New Worlds and then dump all their S.H.I.E.L.D. minions on it and break it immediately before your opponent even has a chance to respond. So I think I'm not sure if he did that in that game, but it was definitely something that he talked about being able to do. It's very impressive when you can pull it off. If Sonus were here, he would say that Teen's Shield works really well together because Teens also have lots of small minions of Power 3, and Shield is really good at playing those. So you can...
Well, the reason we're focused on 3 or less here is that they've got their 2-copy action Proving Grounds, which lets you play minions of Power 3 or less specifically as a talent every turn.
Right. That's... It's a card that, unless you build around it specifically, it can be very difficult to use in the right
Shield internal options.
Yeah, otherwise you're playing Agent Coulson into Shield Agent for like a 6-power burst, and that's just not that exciting. Bland minion abilities, like we've touched on. Go ahead, Berryl, sorry.
Especially if you want to actually use it turn over turn. Like, Agent Coulson is not the thing you want to be playing every turn.
No, he's a burst only to break a base kind of guy. But
yeah.
So looking at the counters over here, we're going to see these particular factions a lot anytime there's a Swarm faction we discuss, because they're all engineered to stop Swarm pretty effectively.
And these are specifically what counters Shield in this case, rather than what Shield counters.
Yes. Shield doesn't really counter anything, but They are countered by Dragons and Tricksters for a lot of the same reasons. Dragons and Tricksters are the premier area control factions in the game. They lock down a base and make it difficult to play on, and they punish you for playing lots of small minions on there, which is exactly what Shield does. Princesses go about it in a different way. They're really on this list because of their one minion, Eliza, who just prevents you from playing minions, period, after a certain point. And then Warriors and Wraith Rustlers are also on here because they're very good at raising the breakpoint of a base, which means you have to spend more effort to break the base. And when you've already got limited minions like you do with Shield for a given burst, and they don't have very many ways to boost their power otherwise, stretching yourself extra thin to break a base can come back to bite you later down the road in a game. Well, next on our list we have the Fairies, and I think this Fairies being second from the bottom will be shocking to a lot of people because Fairies have been around for a long time. 6 out of 10 of their minions are extremely good. We've got Titania, we've got Glimmer, we've got Puck, all of whom are very good minions and have very strong abilities. So why are Fairies second from the bottom these days, Berryl? What do you think?
Well, it's mostly because C tier is kind of the counter tier. It's C for counter. And Fairies are kind of the quintessential example of that. They're very, very good against modifiers, like play on minion, play on base factions. But against anybody else, they're going to suffer a lot because half of their cards aren't going to do anything. Like, Tinks is going to have a lot fewer options to transfer around. Playful Tricks, well, it got its ore now, but before it wouldn't have had anything to do. Magic Ward isn't going to have anything to do. Like, a lot of their cards just get a lot worse when there's nothing for them to mess with.
Right. And since the errata that came out last year, Fairies have gained a couple of new tricks, specifically Playful Tricks, which lets them play their Titan Spirit of the Forest without having to spend a whole turn to do so. And that's another big knock against them is these days, Spirit of the Forest and his ability to double tap an ore ability, any ability that has 2 different abilities that normally you would pick from, he lets you do both. That's a very powerful effect, but also he takes a whole turn to bring into play by himself. And when your average 2-player game lasts about 10 turns a player, that's a whole 10th of your game that you're spending at least to bring him into play. And then if he gets removed from play, you have to bring him back into play. So Playful Tricks takes the edge off that a little bit by just taking your action play rather than both your minion and action play.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I do think that saves you more than 50% of a turn if you want to think about it like that. Because when you play the first time, you're probably not going to have any ores to use that first turn. But when you play Playful Tricks later in the game to bring him in the second time, you're usually going to be able to use a minion or even a second action sometimes to get another ore. So it's more like you're only losing, 35 to 40% of a turn.
Oh yeah, especially when you've got like Puck, who can play Playful Tricks as an extra action, and then you've got an action play to spend at least.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it still takes a chunk of your turn, but not nearly as much as it used to. Just with Spirit of the Forest by itself. But yes, keeping Spirit of the Forest in play, or rather removing him from play, is a good way to counter them. But we'll get into that more here in just a second. The Leaf Armor also got a buff, as I recall.
Yeah.
It now grants the talent for a minion to give itself +2 power, which is huge. It makes Tinks a little more impactful within her own faction. She's not just pulling daisy chains now. She can also You can play leaf armor on a minion, use its talent to give that minion +2 power, and then Tinks can move it to herself and refresh the talent and use it again. So it's a very, that leans into another big weakness that I see for them, which is they have multiple steps they have to go through to get any kind of burst for the most part. Titania, their queen minion, can play an extra minion as part of her ability. But beyond that, you've really got to put work in and set up okay, I'll put a daisy chain on this minion for this turn, and the next turn I'll play Tinks and pull it off, and that's going to be a 6 power swing. And a lot of times, and this is a common theme for a lot of factions in this tier, they can do cool stuff. It just takes too long for them to do it, and faster factions can just blow past them while they're trying to set up the cool thing.
I find it ironic that the two bottom factions are Shield and Fairies, whose leaders are the ones that replace themselves. Like, they give another extra minion play.
Yes. And Titania is, to that matter, is strictly better than Nick Fury because she can play an extra minion or get rid of a minion. and Nick Fury is just play an extra minion. It's a little bit painful. So yes, they're countered by anything that doesn't care about modifiers. It's a lot harder to hurt a faction if they're not bothered by it. They do really well, like we've already said, into factions like Cyborg Apes. They just pick apes apart because they can destroy their modifiers or steal them or what have you, and make it very difficult to play apes into fairies. Removing a base with Spirit of the Forest is also a massive blow to them. They want to keep Spirit of the Forest in play as long as possible. Spirit of the Forest is unique, in fact, in that it stays in play if it loses a Clash of the Titans. You can't remove it from play with another Titan. However, if you remove the base it's on, either by scoring the base or destroying the base with cards that do that, anything from Burn It Down or Not in Kansas from Dragons and Tornadoes, removing the base, remove Spirit of the Forest, and then that's another either card play or entire turn. Fairies have to spin, bringing him back in. And the Time Travelers have the easiest time with this because they have 2 copies of Into the Time Slip. And Into the Time Slip essentially just says, we're going to delete this card from play. Normally it goes back to your hand, but Titans just go out of play. And there's nothing that you can do about that, because you can't even protect a Titan like you can minions.
I don't think there is anything that protects Titans.
So, as far as partners go, Fairies do well with any faction that really likes having their or abilities be double tapped. Ancient Egyptians open up some very interesting plays with cards such as like Lost Knowledge, Dinosaurs. That's a classic combo, simply because Fairies provide multiple extra action plays and 1 extra minion play. So,
Glimmer opens up their destruction a lot.
And Glimmer, yes, Glimmer can allow the dinosaurs to destroy more effectively. So you can really rule the board with these two, and the raw power of the dinosaurs goes a long way when the fairies can take it further.
And same goes for cats and vampires. Same idea. You got Glimmer depower things, and cats take control of them. Vampires, you destroy them for all your vampire benefits.
Right. The big draws for having fairies as a partner in 2026 really come down to Glimmer and Spirit of the Forest.
Pretty much.
Nightmare Before Christmas is a little unique because it's maybe the one other majorly focused minion modifier faction in the game. I would throw Luchadors in there as well, but I think they're probably third behind Fairies. But naturally, you get 2 factions that do the same thing well and put them together, and they're going to do the same thing well, even better than they would by themselves. And Tinks especially is good for pulling the antagonistic Nightmare Before Christmas modifiers from your opposing minion to you, so you can switch from the negative effect to the positive effect very quickly. So, faction number 104 is the Vikings. Might be surprising to some people because Vikings are mean, they're annoying, they steal cards. They're kind of like fairies to me, really. They're a good counterpick faction because they, as it says here in the first bullet point, with the strengths column, they do scale to the strength of their opponents by stealing their cards, or they can block key pieces if they steal the right cards. However, there's a downside to that in that they don't really have a lot of control over what they steal. So unless you're able to just steal over and over and over again, it's really just kind of a blind shot as to what you're going to steal. And sometimes removing cards from your opponent's deck actually helps them.
Yeah. You clear out like a bunch of 2-power minions or weaker actions. Like, oh, thank you.
Yes.
I didn't want that anyway.
Yeah, now I can draw my good cards because you took all the bad ones. Vikings' other mechanic is that they put cards from their hand back on top of their deck to trigger effects. The problem is, when you do that, you're just going to draw back into the cards you just put back on top of your deck. So you slow down your draw. That's what we mean by negative draw over here in the weaknesses column. You're not drawing any new cards because you keep drawing the same ones over and over again. And this is a mechanic they lean into pretty heavily. 6 of their minions do this, and 2 of their actions do this. 1 of their bases does this. So if you're not careful, you can get yourself kind of locked in and not able to draw into the cards you could actually use to do more stuff with. That's partly, I think it's partly justified because they are supposed to steal other players' cards.
Yeah, kind of idea that the stealing is supposed to help make up for the berserking.
Right. In practice, it doesn't always work out as smoothly as that.
And I think that negative draw weakness is a big part of why Vikings are down here, is because it increases their variance a lot. Like, both of Vikings' mechanics are very high variance. Like we already talked about, they don't have control over what they steal, except for Valkyrie. And they also see fewer cards per game because they're putting cards back on top of their deck. And so you got to really make the most of the cards you have, but the cards that they're likely to draw aren't really that good.
Right. Now, like I said, they do scale to the strength of their opponents, which means that Vikings get some very interesting matchups. We can almost imagine this tier list like a horseshoe, in which Vikings match very well against a lot of higher tier factions.
And fairies.
Right, and fairies as well. Ghosts and Lion King are what jump out to me most obviously with as far as like what Vikings do well into, because Ghosts and Lion King both have minions that want to stay on their discard pile, and Valkyrie can just pluck them right out and put them in your hand, and they might never see those minions again for the rest of the game. So goodbye Mufasa strats when Valkyrie's around. But yeah, there are a lot of the good Viking partners either lean into putting cards back on top of their deck or help further exploit the stealing that the Vikings do. Thieves and Time Travelers would be examples of that. Time Travelers, you can just steal, play your stealing cards over and over and over again. Do over on Shield Maiden, do over on Valkyrie. It's astounding on Raiding Party. And Thieves, with the recent rework for Munchkin, Thieves also are interested in taking opponents' cards, and they can use them to a greater effect than Vikings can, because they're fuel for their abilities. What
gets stolen is just a stolen card.
Right. It's not mine. It's someone else's. Therefore, it works for this ability. Innsmouth and Indie Critters and Penguins all really like the fact that Vikings put cards back onto the deck, because Indie Critters want their lower-powered minions in the deck. They don't want them in their hand. Penguins like to play minions off the top of the deck, so you can pick which minion you want to play, put it on the top of the deck, and then play it. And Innsmouth, with their locals drawing into each other, you can kind of sometimes stack your deck by putting locals back on top of the deck, playing a locals, and then just drawing them all back. And you've immediately undone the negative draw as well, and not also forced cards to go to the bottom of your deck. Ghosts are perhaps the most interesting, because they like that Vikings get rid of cards in their hand by putting them on top of their deck, because that activates their abilities. So Viking Ghost is a very scary combo, because you have a lot more control over when you can activate your Ghost abilities, and it doesn't even necessarily require a discard to do it.
Yes, I think that's one of the underrated aspects of that, is you don't have to get rid of the cards. You can still keep them around for later. Right.
Their counters, because they're so inconsistent, anything that can be consistent and doesn't care to lose a few cards will blow right past Vikings. Anansi Tails and Ignobles are kind of funny as counters, because Anansi Tails want their opponents to have their cards so that they can then punish them for playing them, and Ignobles can just take back control of whatever minion you play as a Viking player. Very, very interesting. This might be the only time we see these two factions. Well, not Anansi Tails. I take that back. Anansi Tails will show up as a counter for some other factions, perhaps, but definitely Ignobles. You don't see them as a counter very often. Faction number 103, we're jumping back into Marvel with the Sinister Six. Yeah, you and Sonus and I talked about this earlier, how, we all like Sinister Six. So it does sadden me that they're down here this low. We like Sinister Six. Lots of people like Sinister Six. They keep getting picked in tournaments, and they keep losing. Unfortunately, being popular is not necessarily equate being competitively viable.
They deserve to be down here.
Yes, so they've got a unique hook that not a lot of other factions do. They manipulate breakpoints. They have one of the best minions in the game and 2 copies of it, Green Goblin. They have lots of draw capability. They've got a unique minion structure that I think is very cool. With 6 unique minions, all of whom are power 4 or less. They constantly run into issues of having below average power. Their entire strategy almost entirely revolves around trying to get the breakpoint low enough that they can break it or take advantage of it otherwise. They don't have a lot of plus power to add. They're relying on that negative power they bring to the breakpoint, which means they're very susceptible to being overtaken. They're there to just mainly lower the breakpoint. Bigger, faster factions can take advantage of that too and use them as stepping stones. A lot of their minions do the same thing. Green Goblin is very good, but there are 5 other minions in the faction that do roughly the same thing as Green Goblin does. We've got Doc Ock, who lowers breakpoint. We've got Electro, who lowers breakpoint. Sandman and Electro, that's another weakness, is the 2 power minions basically do the same thing, even though they're different minions. And the thing that they do is very slight. So
sometimes even negative in the case of Electro.
Okay, yes. So as far as partners go, they really like factions
base modifiers.
Yeah, they like base modifiers, and they like factions with big minions that can take advantage of the low breakpoint and help them get that last little bit of power they need to actually break the base.
Actually win instead of just break and lose.
Right. I know Nelegend several years ago in his Marvel tournament identified Sinister Avengers as a great combo for that. And that's another case where they kind of complement each other's weaknesses. Grannies, I have said before on Crank It Up that grannies go well with all the Marvel factions. This is a great case of this. Green Goblin, played from the bottom of your deck with Great Grandma, can be by himself a 7 power drop for free. And with the recursion ability that grannies have, you can just do that over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. Werewolves also bring a lot of power, and they bring the ability to double tap talents. So Mysterio gets to double tap his talent. Green Goblin gets to double tap his talent. My Master Plan, you get to draw 2 cards with that.
And worth noting, probably not quite as strong with the nerf to Great Wolf Spirit last year.
And then, lastly, just as some suggestions here, we have Ancient Incas, Killer Plants, and Wraith Wrestlers, all of whom are base modifier factions and really assist Sinister Six with their base modifiers. Vulture is great for base modifier factions because he can grab Overgrowth again, and Killer Plants in particular really like Sinister Six because there's so much manipulation of Overgrowth that you can do. You can move it after a base scores with Sinister Six. You can replay it, pull it out of your discard pile more easily with Sinister Six. Wraith Wrestlers also have base modifiers that are important. They also have Demon Dogs that can get Green Goblin back into play. Green Goblin being 3 power is significant. Makes it much easier to find out of your deck. Killer Plants sprout into Green Goblin. Wraith Wrestlers, Demon Dogs into Green Goblin. Grannies, like I said, it's crucial that he is as weak as he is, but also his talent is as strong as it is, because that's what makes him so scary. But as far as counters go, they're small minions, so mermaids can take advantage of them, move them around. Mulan can blow past them and destroy them.
Leave a lot of permanent power out so Sinister Six can't get past them.
Yes. Sinister Six is not very good at answering come-at-me strategies, which basically just means I play a lot of power on the base, and even if I can't break the base this turn, I'm daring you to try to surpass me on your turn before I break it again next turn. And Sinister Six just cannot do that. They'll say, we'll lower the breakpoint, make it easier for you to score, but that's about as much as they can do. Truckers can steal their base modifiers. Ninjas can destroy their base modifiers and destroy their minions. Lots and lots of easy pickings for ninjas there. And Nightmare Before Christmas. Nightmare is another faction that we'll probably see a lot of in the counters, just because they've got some very mean modifiers. We've got Jack-o'-lantern.
Jack-o'-lantern in the box.
Yes, Jack-o'-lantern in the box, which blocks your ability to draw cards. And that's one of the few things Sinister Six does really well. Mm-hmm. You just can't do that now. They also have Ghostly Presence, which is a card that prevents you from playing minions as power 3 or less on the base. And all but 2 of their minions are power 3 or less. So some very brutal interactions there. Anything else about Sinister Six before we move on to number 102?
Now realizing that Mysterio in this picture is absolutely ripped.
Yeah, he's super shredded. I keep noticing that. It's a little off-putting. But anyway, on to number 102, which is another Marvel faction, Spider-Verse. What do you think about...
3 Marvel so far.
Yes, lots of Marvel, unfortunately. What do you think about Spider-Verse, Berryl?
So, Spider-Verse is an interesting case where they're trying to do something that a couple factions before them have already done. Like, they're a third very... specials-oriented faction. They play a lot of cards before the base scores, which we saw previously with ninjas and mega troopers. And they try and throw in this theme of being a little bit stronger in phase 2. But because they have that flexibility, they kind of need to have those options both be weaker than normal, which makes sense. Like we've seen that before with G.I. Gerald. Well, I guess that came after, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
We know that flexibility requires the actual ceiling be a little higher, what you actually get out be a little lower. Sorry, a little lower, not higher. But what ends up happening with Spider-Verse is they try to do a bunch of things and they do them all poorly.
Yes. You may notice here in the strengths column, I have acceptable deck sifting. And they've got Ghost Spider, they've got View from Above, in particular is the one I'm thinking of, because that one actually reveals information to your opponent. You have to name what you're looking for, and you have to reveal cards until you find that card, and then you put it in your hand. And by that point, your opponent has seen every card that's not in your hand, that's still in your deck. And in high-level smash-up play, card information like that is super important. When your opponent knows what you have and don't have, they can play around that a lot more easily. They don't have to guess if they know you.
Who cares about your opponent not knowing what you have, which specials you have?
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, Spider-Verse loves to hoard cards. I mean, they kind of have to. Yeah, I think so. This first bullet point in the strength section, I'm paraphrasing from something Nelligan said several years ago, which is that Spider-Verse will steal one base, almost surely. It might take all their specials to do it, but they'll steal it. And then they have to rely on their partner to break the other two bases for them. Because their cards are just so weak. So ninjas have Shinobi, and Mega Troopers have Green Trooper, both of whom are notorious for being able to hop on a base. Even if you weren't there before, you can hop on and get a free 2 points, which, as we've discussed earlier, 1 minion for 2 VP, that's a good trade most of the time. Spider-Verse have Miles Morales, and Miles Morales does almost the same thing, except he requires a minion to already be on the base. And when you play him, he has -1 power. So what ends up happening is you end up hoarding Miles Morales in your hand because you want enough of him to make a difference. You also need a minion on the base that you're trying to steal. And that's the way it is with all their cards. There are so many circumstances that have to fall into place serendipitously. You're kind of relieved when you finally play them all to get a base scored, because then you don't have to worry about it anymore. You can play a regular game of Smash Up. But their best card, in my opinion, is Webbed Up, because ability cancellation is so important, especially in the modern metagame. There are lots of powerful abilities for minions that like to
think want to get left out.
Yes, like there are certain minions that want to stay in play and want to farm this ability for as long as possible, and Webbed Up just immediately neutralizes that. -2 power and cancels your ability. There are lots of high-tier factions that really hate to see ability cancellation, just because so much of their strategy revolves around exploiting the same abilities over and over again. So, as far as partners go, Cowboys bring a lot of raw power. They have some dueling, which allows Spider-Verse to play more of their actions. Sheriff dueling while the base is scoring allows Spider-Verse to play their actions during scoring and not suffer a penalty.
Oh, we forgot to mention Cowboy Spider-Verse is a loan-in special.
Yes. And these, all these partner recommendations, I have not played all of these. These are recommendations from people in the community, the board game Bandit from over on Crank It Up. Anytime I say Bandit, that's what I'm talking about. Cowboy Spider-Verse, that is a loan-in special. Loan-in is a longtime member of our community. He's not been able to be as active recently, but shout out to him. He's a great guy. And this was, I believe, if you go over to the Crank It Up channel, you will find an episode in Bandit's Unexpected Party series that Lonan did about Spider-Verse Cowboys. Mega Trooper Spider-Verse, again, two factions doing kind of the same thing. Mega Troopers does it a whole lot better now. Shield, again, it's an inbox combo with Marvel. Shield provides more bodies for Spider-Verse to throw at things, and Spider-Verse gives Shield more opportunities to boost their power besides their own piddly attempts with their cards that they have. Super Spider-Verse, this is another Bandit combo, because Spies are just better at deck sifting than Spider-Verse is. And it takes a lot of reliance on Spider-Verse's specials to carry a steal, because Spies also have lots of good special options. And then Tornadoes, because Tornadoes also have very good specials. And you can keep something like Spider-Man, the big Spider-Man, Power 5 Spider-Man, in play with Tornado Persistence.
Back up to Spider-Man 2099 for keeping presents for Miles and such.
Yes, indeed. So as far as counters go, I put Elves in here because Elves, Spider-Verse loves to hoard cards. Elves will happily trade whatever So they play the card trade, they take a card out of your hand. Well, that's one less special you potentially have to work with now, and it wasn't that good to begin with. Elves can also steal your Spider-Man 2099s with Flower Child. They can wreck your setup. That's just what they're good at. And if you do happen to steal a base from them, Berryl, you mentioned this earlier, Elves can just play Helping Hands and take one of your VP right back. It's super obnoxious. Orcs are on the list now because orcs attack hand size now, as of the 2026 Munchkin rework. And what that means is they shrink the amount of cards that you can hold in your hand at once. So you go down from being able to hold 10 cards to 8. And when Spider-Verse already has an issue with cluttering their hand full of cards they want to hold on to, that really hurts. Russian Fairy Tale is also on here because they can... Spider-Verse has minions that want to be played at very specific times, like Miles Morales, like Spider-Man 2099, like Spider-Man himself, and Russian Fairy Tale's forced transformations can throw that out of whack. Their mass transformation card can ruin a hand that you're trying to hold on to draw up all these specials. And Tornadoes are a good partner for Spider-Verse. They're also a good counter to Spider-Verse because they can pick up is their before scoring special that moves a minion off the base. And if you're relying on keeping one minion on the base to jump on with Miles Morales, now that just pulls that to pieces. And then Sinister Six is also on here because Sinister Six has a card specifically designed to combat Spider-Verse that blocks specials.
Well, worth noting, the orc card that cuts your hand size also prevents you from playing specials.
That's very true. That's something that orcs can do now. In addition to cutting your hand size, they also block specials. So, pain all the way through. All right, let's move on to our penultimate faction for tonight's episode, which is another Marvel faction, the Masters of Evil. And this is another faction.
One we want to love.
Yes, we want... I like the concept of Masters of Evil. I think it's neat that they have abilities that scale to VP accumulation.
Shield was robots brought down to Earth, then Masters of Evil are aliens brought down to Earth.
So the saying goes.
Other similarities. Like, Masters of Evil also have a fair amount of removal, like aliens do. It's a lot more limited, but it's also there.
Indeed. Masters of Evil, they got a great late game. Once they've got 12 or more VP and they're firing on all cylinders, they're very good at getting the last few pieces they need to close the gap to 15. They can accrue VP without having to rely on scoring bases, like we've already said. They can provide stall. The problem is, all their abilities that are so good late in the game do nothing early on in the game.
Like, literally nothing.
Yeah. Their 4-power minion, who's supposed to be one of their strongest, draws cards for every 4 VP you have. He does nothing at the beginning of the game. So if you draw him early, you're just sitting on a blank 4-power minion. And even when you do get 4 VP, he still only draws you a single card, which pales in comparison to Spider-Verse's Ghost Spider, right before we talked about Masters of Evil. Same minion slot, way better ability, way more consistent.
Mm-hmm.
And then several of their VP gain cards, we call it VP chips sometimes, they need so many different pieces into play to actually work. Like, you need 2 Absorbing Men to get 1 VP. You need 4 minions on the same base for Convergence to work. You get all this setup done, and then your opponent can just blow right past it, score the base, win the base, and also reset anything that you just tried to do.
On Absorbing Man, going back to our discussion about removal earlier, often, if your opponent doesn't have removal, then you can leave a 2-power out and get 2 to 3 VP. Whereas if you use Absorbing Man's ability, each Absorbing Man is worth half a VP, and you don't get that presence on the base for it.
Right. So it kind of becomes a trade-off. So they really like partners that can carry the game for them, because as you can see here in the right-hand column, they're countered by the early game, and that's no matter what factions you're playing, this will always be an issue for Masters of Evil. They do not do well at the beginning of the game at all. So they really need a partner who can carry most of the game for them while they're charging up. We've got a lot of recommendations here. Grannies, like I said, they go with everything. Grim Fairy Tales, that's a Sonus favorite because you can do things like... And same with Lion King. Both of these factions have big minions that want to be destroyed, and Masters of Evil have a card called Acceptable Losses. You destroy a minion to power 4 or more to gain a VP, and that puts Big Bad Wolf online, that puts Lion King online. Grim Fairy Tales also has lots of ways to bring Baron Zemo back into play, and he's clearly their best minion. And that's why Superheroes is on the list too, because they can just get Zemo in play over and over and over again. And Baron Zemo never actually goes to the discard pile if his ability fires off correctly. So he will be a constant target for mild-mannered citizens because he's always going to be available. And then,
every base should be worth an extra VP.
Yes. And then Innsmouth is on here because they have a lot of cards that let you play minions of the same name, multiples at the same time. Great way to get Absorbing Men out. Innsmouth also have new Acolytes, which shuffles minions back into your deck. So all this self-destruction you're doing, they can replenish your deck. And Innsmouth is just a strong faction, so it can consistently carry the game. It will pull the Innsmouth cards out that you want early on and put the Masters of Evil cards that you don't want on the bottom, which is also a big draw. And then Killer Plants, also a strong faction, also can carry the game pretty well. Black Mamba is a great target for Sprout. You've got Blossom to play multiple Absorbing Men at once. There's just a lot of good options there as well.
Spoiler alert, all of the things we've got listed here, they're pretty high up in the list.
Yes. We'll talk about these several videos down the road, I imagine. So Masters of Evil counters, like I said, the early game, they're so slow to start. Faster factions, that's going to be most things. Ninja Sharks and Slashers get special mention here, just because Masters of Evil are so vulnerable to destruction. Ninjas are going to show up a lot in counters just because they're the most efficient destruction faction in the game. If they want your cards gone, they will be gone between Infiltrate for base modifiers, Poison for minion modifiers, and then there are a litany of destruction options for minions. Masters of Evil will have a hard time keeping their key pieces in play long enough to actually use them. Sharks eat small minions, never leave an Absorbing Man out. When Sharks or Slashers are around, that's just free kibble for them. Yeah, and they can kind of beat Masters of Evil down into submission with repeated destruction. Anything else about Masters of Evil before we move on to our final faction for tonight?
Yeah, I'd say unlike the other factions we've discussed so far, Masters of Evil in the competitive scene have kind of found their niche. Like, they're not picked very often, but when they are picked, they tend to be very successful. And that kind of says, like, okay, people know how to play Masters of Evil, even if they're not very good.
Right. I mean, the strategy is straightforward enough. Win more.
They're very good at closing out the game. That's
yes.
kind of the whole idea of VP Chef. Like, it helps with mathing out which bases you should score. Like, okay, I can only get to 13 or 14 VP if I score this base, as opposed to another, but then I can end the game with my acceptable losses, my Absorbing Men, what have you. And that's a really good value proposition on its own.
Yeah. Yeah, the end of the game is when Absorbing Man all of a sudden becomes very threatening.
Yeah.
Because all you need is one extra VP, and 14 to 15, and the game is over. Yeah, Masters of Evil, they will... I wouldn't be surprised if they rise in the tier list in the future. We need more data on them, ultimately. They need more time in the competitive scene, now that people are kind of used to how they need to play, what they look for in a partner. So I look forward to seeing the future of their career. Anyway, on to number 100 tonight. We have the Sumo Wrestlers. And this is a faction that I think all of us were discussing this earlier, kind of being surprised that they're this low. I mean, 100 out of 106. Because they've got a lot of good qualities. They've got a lot of power. They've got a lot of draw. They've got some very interesting discard synergy. But when you zoom out from them and look at them, that's pretty much all they have to offer. They've got some movement. They can push minions off bases. But they can't even really fully take advantage of that because they don't really have any movement themselves to follow up with that.
It's because a lot of their antagonistic movement is from their minions, like Third Tier and Yokozuna. 4 of their minions are themselves moving minions away from their own bases, not towards them like a Charmer would, for example.
Right. Charmers and Tornadoes do this much better. Bear Cavalry used to have the same problem, and then they got reworked and waved goodbye to Sumo Wrestlers in bottom tier. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot to like about Sumo Wrestlers. Like I said, they've got tons of draw. But I think, Kasonis mentioned this earlier, you look at them and you see the amount of power they can drop, and you think, this is what we would call a headlining faction, the one who's leading the charge, dropping the power. Really, they're more of a support faction because of their draw.
I think I said earlier, they're support through power, where they can't really provide big, huge bursts on their own. Like, you would see some of the higher tier factions, but if you pair them right, they can provide a serviceable amount of power if, say, you've got like a Wizards partner who can't do much of that on their own.
Right.
Sumos will provide the value per card that you're looking for.
And as a reminder, this is a 2-player tier list. Sumo Wrestlers, and honestly, several of the factions in this C tier do better in higher player counts, simply because there's more players involved. There's more minions on the board at any given moment, and therefore there's more to take advantage of. You don't have to put down as much power to break a base because there's just going to be more power sitting around already.
Yeah.
A lot of issues that in two-player in competitive play happen because one player can hold all their cards in their hand and not do anything, and then dump a bunch of cards all at once and, do what we call a zero to break strategy, which is the base had nothing on it, and then the base was broken. And
there's no in between.
And your opponent suddenly has 4 victory points that you cannot contest at all. So factions that just try to play the game by dropping a little power, drawing a few cards, that is why they end up sinking more to the bottom, because they're just too slow, ultimately.
Yeah. Sumos suffer severely from 2 cards of turnitis.
Yes, 2 cards of turnitis, which is exactly what it sounds like. You can play your minion, you can play your action, and that's it. And sumo wrestlers exacerbate this a little bit because their best cards also require you to discard cards.
Mm-hmm.
You're burning other options, potentially, to accomplish what you need to, as far as like a big bulking stew play, where you dump your entire hand. Even something like Chikara Mizu, which is discard a card, give a minion +4 power. It's a decent burst, but it's costly. It adds up over time.
Indeed it does.
So partner recommendations, Bear Cavalry. This was a March Smashness combo that Bandit came up with. It's even better now because bears are significantly better now. Beauty and the Beast Ghosts and Mages should all be obvious. They're all discard-heavy factions themselves. Mages in particular, with their recent update, they can offset the cost of the discard onto your opponent now with Blaster Master. Which is neat. So the sumo cards don't end up being quite as costly, slightly, for the most part. Bulking Stew is still going to hurt your hand size. And then Giant Ants and Vampires. Giant Ants love the power counters that sumo wrestlers provide. Giant Ants give sumo wrestlers extra actions to play with Death on 6 Legs, which they always appreciate. Giant Ants have an extra movement card and Headlong that sumo can take advantage of after they've pushed a minion off. And then Vampires, especially with their rework, there's a lot to like there. Vampire sumo was good when Vampires were bad. So now that they're better...
And it's honestly good for much of the same reasons. Like, part of the reason sumo Vampires was good before is because you could discard the Vampire cards. And even though Vampires are better, a few of their cards still want to be discarded.
Right.
And in fact, they kind of want a healthy discard pile. So sumo still helps them with that.
Absolutely. So yeah, they're countered by movement factions. Pushing a minion off a base is absolutely no good if the minion will just move back on next turn. Ultimates are who I think of specifically because of a game I played once in which I would push minions off and then they just move right back on. Tornadoes can counter this. Steampunks can counter this a little bit. Mounties can counter this a little bit. Kung Fu Fighters are also on this list just because they can steal the sumo power counters and they can destroy the sumo minions pretty easily. I think Yokozuna may be the only one that gives them a bit of trouble. But even then, he's 6 power. They don't have to destroy him. They can just break the base out from under him. Use his power against him. And then Nightmare Before Christmas is on here again because of Jack-O-Lantern in the box. And just ruin your draw, which is one of the best things that sumo have to offer. And they can punish Yokozuna because they have a card, Oogie Boogie, that cancels minion abilities. And that's really what you want to use Yokozuna for. They got a lot of potential, but as with all the factions in this tier, sumos need a very specific type of partner to succeed.
Indeed.
Okay, well, any closing thoughts either for sumo or on any of the factions we've discussed thus far, Berryl, before we wrap up for tonight?
For sumo in particular, I think early on when I was playing the game, I thought sumo were pretty darn good. And I think that might have been a more common opinion. And it's kind of been sad to see them fall this low. But they definitely deserve it, unfortunately.
Yeah. Again, I've said it before, and I'll say it as many times as I have to. Just because these factions are bottom tier does not mean we dislike them. We like a lot of the factions down here. I never ever want tier lists to become a way of people thinking, "Oh, I can't play with these factions because they're bad." They're not bad. They're a little more constrained. So,
yeah, I think you said at the top, the differences between the individual factions is extremely small. And I think even the difference between Shield and our eventual number one is not as big as it might appear to be.
Right. And again, this is high-level competitive play we're talking about. If you're playing casually, the curve gets a lot flatter there. Which is fine. But,
that's good.
Again, the state of the game in 2026 is that all the factions feel fairly competitive with each other. And I think that's a great sign. 106
Agreed.
factions in the game. If they all feel kind of close, I mean, that's great. This means you've got endless opportunity to experiment and not necessarily feel like you're just going to get run over. We will go ahead and call it a wrap for tonight. Thank you for your time, Berryl, and maybe you'll join us again when we go further into the tier list, which might be several videos in at this point, considering
we'll see
how the pace of things is going. But
we'll see.
Thank you to everyone who's joined us so far, and look forward to more of these videos in the future.